right. Thanks to all of our listeners for joining us once again. Very excited for this episode. We actually have a four-way, not to be punny, but there's four screens here that we're going to be recording with. And we're very honored to be having our guests here, Dr. Allison Ash, Dr. Allie, and her husband, Sebastian, Seb. So, today our topic is really going to be on intimacy. And I think this topic is really important, especially for men, because I think that we are such bad communicators. That's become a theme throughout this podcast, that we just don't know how to communicate well with ourselves, with our doctors, with our partners, with our family members and our friends. So when it comes to intimacy, specifically couples intimacy, I think there's like a spectrum of how people define being intimate, not only with themselves, but with a partner. Can you explain your definitions for intimacy and, how men should approach in general this concept of intimacy with themselves and with a partner?
Sure. I like to think of intimacy as mutual shared vulnerability. And I think it's helpful to think about different kinds of intimacy. So there's the emotional intimacy, which is the feeling of feeling known in our emotional landscape, how we feel, what our needs are, what our desires may be, that we can reveal this to somebody else and that they'll reciprocate and reveal that back to us. Physical intimacy is feeling comfort, being physically affectionate with somebody. We might share physical intimacy with close friends, with family members, as well as our partners. And then sexual intimacy has that more erotic, pleasure-based component. And when we think of sexual intimacy, you can have sex without sexual intimacy. When it includes sexual intimacy, it's this feeling of being emotionally naked when we're physically naked and feeling more comfortable to explore together, to be in the messiness of sex, to really want to help the other person feel good and also be vulnerable about what makes us feel good.
I love the way that you described that, breaking it down, like there's the emotional aspect, there's the physical aspect, and there's the sexual aspect. Because I'll tell you, I think most guys, when we think intimacy, we just think of one thing. It's not kind of broken up 100%. Into those three parts. Now, I think you kind of answered this, but does intimacy only happen during sex, or can men become intimate with their partners outside the bedroom? Kind of what you kind of alluded to.
I would say absolutely. It's even essential for men to become intimate with their partners outside the bedroom. I think what Dr. Allie pointed to around emotional intimacy is something that we can cultivate throughout a day or a week. And similarly, actually, sexual intimacy is not something that is just confined to the bedroom, but we can start to include little moments of connection that don't lead to sex throughout our day, throughout little moments that we have opportunities to connect and cultivate some momentum of intimacy that doesn't have to just be in the bedroom.
Yeah. And I think that's I think where a lot of guys struggle, right? We, as Kevin kind of alluded here, I think when we're saying, intimacy, a lot of guys are like, oh yeah, we're going to go have sex. Like I'm going to be giving you something so that I get a return later on in the bedroom of some sorts, right? And I think this comes to our idea, with poor communication a lot, which I had mentioned before. And I think that, this idea of emotional intimacy and, obviously you said it translates into the bedroom, and you said that you can start doing that prior as just another way of connecting with your partner. But as poor communicators, as most men are, can that lack of emotional intimacy in other places impact satisfaction in the bedroom, intimacy with your partner in the bedroom? And if so, how can we do a better job of that?
Undoubtedly. These are different types of intimacy, but they mutually reinforce one another. And when we think about sexual intimacy, sometimes, you might both be in a flow state and you're just feeding off of each other's energy and it feels seamless and easy. You don't need to talk about it. But I think that's more the anomaly than the norm. And oftentimes that happens when you have a baseline level of communication and emotional intimacy. Good sex requires being able to redirect things that don't feel good, ask for things that you want, explore, which means encountering no's or things that aren't quite working for you and being able to roll with that, hearing and saying no and staying in connection and not shutting down or feeling overly rejected to the point that your defenses come up. Being able to reveal enjoyment, not perform pleasure, but reveal authentic enjoyment. So both the other person is getting accurate data about what's working for you, but also because we want to know that you feel good, right? We can be generous lovers not only by giving pleasure, but by helping people pleasure us and giving those positive feedback loops. And I think when we think about communication around sex, it can happen before, during, and after. And it can happen verbally and non-verbally. And for some folks, it's really hard for them to communicate using words during sex. And so if that's the case, it's really important to beef up your nonverbal communication and to supplement that with verbal communication before and after so that you can clarify what certain cues mean, or you can talk about what you're excited to do or not open to doing, or what was really hot and what really worked well for you. Like, the verbal communication has to have a place, but we oftentimes are working with folks to get creative when it feels too hard to communicate during.
I'm glad you really talked about how the flow state being like kind of an anomaly, because I'll tell you, the flow state was, I mean, I've been married for a while. The flow state was happening a lot when we were younger. Yeah, you know, maybe a little bit more of an anomaly now. You know, not just kidding. So, but you know, it's interesting though, right? Because I think guys just think it's, you know, intimacy is just kind of this one way, it's just going to happen and it's going to always be good. And, you know, that kind of arrives to my next question. What is a common complaint that you hear from female partners regarding intimacy issues that men face in the bedroom?
Not being able to communicate, not feeling comfortable exploring, not changing it up, having it feel really routine. I think oftentimes a lack of attunement is a real big issue. So attunement is a calibration process where you can kind of sense what somebody else is wanting and feeling and adjust accordingly. And I think part of the challenge there is, you know, male and female anatomy is very different. And what male anatomy may enjoy, more intensity, more roughness, faster speeds and paces, is sometimes different than what female anatomy may enjoy. And we tend to do what we want to receive without realizing that what the other person might like to receive could be very different from what you want to receive. And every body is different, and what every person likes can change from time to time. It's a moving target, which is why that verbal communication is so important, because it's not fair to expect somebody to know what I want all the time, even an ongoing lover. And I think for men, it can be the equivalency of not stopping to ask for directions, right? They feel like they're supposed to know it. They're supposed to have the answers. And if they don't, then it's an indication of them not being a good lover rather than the opposite, which is actually, to me, I think, and for a lot of women, an indication of them actually being a very confident lover, that they're comfortable asking and adjusting and calibrating.
That's so interesting. That's basically that IKEA problem, Kevin, the IKEA and the directions problem that I've used in the past, where, you know, guys, when it comes to their health, they don't want to ask questions. They want to figure it out themselves. They want to, you know, and they struggle, right? They'll struggle. They'll do it the way that they want, the best way that they think they can do. And it's often not successful. So what do they have to do? They have to go back to the drawing board and ask for help. And it sounds like this is the same thing that a lot of guys do with their sexual partners. They're trying to do what they think is best. And it's maybe not intentionally bad, but it is obviously not ideal for the female partner. And eventually either the partner has had enough of it where they say something, or the guy figures it out and they finally ask. So once again, this idea of guys trying to do it on their own without asking or communicating for help is something that we need to highlight here. And I think that's such an interesting point that you've brought up.
Wait, Seb, you wanted to say something, right?
Yeah, can I just add, I think to what you're saying, there's something also about that asking from a man in a hetero dynamic where it creates a permission and it templates that it's okay to have needs and to be vulnerable and to not know, right? So often, maybe as a guy, I'll ask what my partner is wanting in a moment, and she might not know. And so maybe I can give her some options and create some kind of normalization of curiosity and play and exploration, right? And then in the future, that's going to give her some templating of like, yeah, you can also do that. You don't have to always know what my cock is wanting in a specific day or moment.
That sounds sexy. I mean, honestly, that just sounds
It is.
sexy to me, right? Like,
yeah. I like the multiple choice thing.
Sexy.
Yeah.
I like the multiple choice thing. It's kind of like, hey, look, like I'm putting this on the table and like kind of like, no, I love it, like normalizing it, like saying like, hey, I'm bringing this out. I'm giving this vulnerability aspect of it. And it's like choices too. So it's kind of, I'm a multiple choice guy. So yeah.
I think a lot of us are. When you ask most people out of the blue, what do you like or what do you want? A lot of folks are going to have deer in the headlights. And that feels sometimes traumatizing and embarrassing and shame inducing. But if I give you a menu, it's so much easier to make a choice, and that feels empowering and exciting and bonding.
Yeah, it's such a great point. I do want to, I was thinking about when Kevin was, and you were both alluding to, we're talking about this idea that sometimes you're just rolling, like you and your partner are just feeling it. And I think we've all been there where you're like, holy shit, this is awesome. All of a sudden it just connects and you feel amazing. And there's just this really great experience. But sometimes it's hard to get back to that. You don't know how to verbalize it because sometimes there were no words. It was just the moment. It was the sensation. If you like, can you figure out what it was? Like, are there ways? Is it right after you have to debrief? Is it like something that you can continue to work on? Because obviously a lot of guys, including myself, sometimes I can't put my finger on exactly what it was that time that really got us going, but it was different. It was awesome. It was intimate. So how do we, when those moments come, how do we do our best to recreate them in the future?
It's a great question. And I think part of it is kind of Chinese finger trapping that concept and actually making space for not all of sexual intimacy and play to be that incredible flow state that Kevin, you remember from your younger days with you. It's like chasing that high. Yeah. And so there's a permission of like, can we let it be okay to have sometimes that there's more conversation and, less flow state excitement, feeling like you're the most sexy, confident person in the world. And sometimes you're just like, all right, we had pretty okay sex and it wasn't mind blowing, but it was good. And it was nice. And we feel connected. And then I think also this conversation about communicating and fine tuning pleasure and arousal through opening up channels of conversation and adjusting things in the moment can be really helpful. And for a lot of people, that's sort of a new skill to explore. And there's going to be a phase in the beginning where it just doesn't feel sexy. It feels like it kills the vibe and it's like taking you out of the flow state. And that's an inevitable phase of learning any new skill. And so if you can stick with it and practice and get more comfortable with a partner, having that kind of communication before, during, and after sex, eventually that is going to be one of the fundamental ingredients that helps more sustainable flow state sex happen, right? It's not going to feel like it ruins a vibe.
And I might add, I think that there's a lot of situational, contextual factors that impact our libido and our arousal and our sexual connection with our partners. And humans are so good at being so mean to ourselves. And we're always going to assume the reason why we don't feel that flow state or the sexual connection we want is because something's wrong with us and we messed up or something's wrong with the relationship, rather than thinking about How much stress are you experiencing? Have you slept a lot? Have you gotten a good workout in? Have you had some positive connection experiences outside of your relationship that feel nourishing to you? What's your self-esteem looking like? And then, of course, NRE, new relationship energy. You know, Kevin, when you talked about how you felt flow states more easily in the beginning of your relationship, me too. Like that's really normal, because when you're in a new relationship, your brain is flooding your body with norepinephrine and oxytocin and endorphin, serotonin, all of these, oxytocin, of course, all of these yummy chemicals that make you feel like you're 16 again and super horny. And that NRE can override exhaustion and stress, needs for foreplay and attunement. Like it's just an amazing high. And in longer term relationships, for most people, and we tend to think of for most women, but I know a lot of men that we work with in our coaching practice, desire becomes more responsive. It's, in other words, it's not like I feel horny and then I want to have sex. For some people, that's the case. But for a lot of people, it's more so that we need to create opportunities for desire to come online. And then our desire will build as an experience is unfolding. But if you're too stressed or disconnected from your partner or not in your body or whatever else it may be, it's not supporting those conditions for your desire to come online.
Sounds like the emotional availability, the emotional intimacy opens up that path for at least a signal to your partner that you're ready to be physically intimate in certain times.
That's right. And also, any pleasure awakens the pleasure centers of your brain. So oftentimes we're telling folks, create sensory-based pleasure, right? Things that are soothing and appealing to your senses, and more sensual pleasure, things that feel good on your body. And this can also prime the brain and the body for more sexual pleasure.
I'll add one thing too, that we love this concept of an intimacy bank, where we all have this sort of bank account of intimacy that we're constantly adding or withdrawing from. And in long-term relationships, often we'll get into a rhythm where we're going about our lives and work and everything kind of with our partner as like a roommate or a friend. And then suddenly we're supposed to switch on the drop of a dime. Now they're our girlfriend and our new person again. And that's unrealistic to get to that flow state when we're in that sort of hot-cold dynamic. And so we like to think of the intimacy bank as something that if you continue to make little deposits over time outside of the bedroom, like we were saying before, that's going to make it so much easier when you're in the bedroom to access that kind of intimacy of connection and closeness with your partner. And so that's little moments where you're in the kitchen and you come up behind her and whisper something in her ear, or maybe it's a little more grabbing her ass and saying something dirty to her. Little moments of asking how her day was, bringing a sweet gift home, something that's feeding the intimacy overall in the relationship. So it's sort of lubricating that pathway for connection.
That's
I love that.
Good.
I'm going to try that shortly. I'll let you know, Seb and Dr. Ali, how that works. No, but I love that, because you guys are so right, because life gets more layered. You start getting scheduled, you got the stress, everything else. And those earlier flow state times, you were kind of without all that structure. It was just kind of like that sexual intimacy was kind of happening all the time. And as structure gets in, and what you were kind of alluding to, Seb, that you got to still be working at it. You got to be working at it to be building it and to be non-verbally hinting at it and building that connection to sustain it. And I think it's an important thing that guys need to know. You agree, Justin?
100%. And I think that everyone at different stages of their relationship, different stages of their lives, really have different ways in which they can express themselves, should express themselves, or learn new ways to do so in a way that, you're saying is appropriate. I just immediately, when you said this intimacy bank, it's almost like a couple spank bank. It's kind of how I thought of it. In many ways, but it's much like you're picking up little sexy things to get me going later on in the day. So I got this intimacy, this couple spank bank going on in my head.
That's right. And I think One other thing that's so valuable about the intimacy bank is anytime you have any intimacy, whether it leads in penetrative sex or orgasm or not, you're still making a deposit into the intimacy bank that's enriching the overall intimacy of your relationship. And I think the power of this is it reframes experiences that may have felt like a failure or a loss into a win, because you're still making that deposit. You're still moving towards more connection in the relationship. And I know we want to talk about challenges with ED tonight. And the reality is that makes sex and intimacy feel so risky, so prime for failure and disappointment and shame. But if you can realize you're showing up for your relationship, and any pleasure that you experience, any connection you experience is a positive value add, then it makes it less risky to explore what desire is available, what ways our body might show up. And I think that's so important, because I think for a lot of folks, when they think about pleasure, the more fear and anxiety you have about how it goes, the more likely that's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, where those things you're afraid of happening are going to happen. And so taking the pressure off by just saying, hey, we're showing up for connection, and whatever happens is a win, is so helpful, because people of all genders and orientations feel pressure when it comes to sex. And we have to think about how we can release some of that pressure so we can get back to pleasure.
All right. So I think that is a great way to kind of transition to ED, to kind of talk about this next talking point. Now, statistically speaking, 50% of men will have an issue with their erections in their lifetime, and it is by far the most common sexual dysfunction in men. ED for many men can be devastating. They identify their penis and their ability to satisfy their partner sexually as a major part of their manhood. And when they have issues, they may not want to engage in sex anymore. So from your experiences as a sex coach, what are some of the most common emotional or relational struggles couples face when dealing with erectile dysfunction?
I think there's a real gender dynamic here. And so I'm going to speak specifically about heterodynamics for a minute, because I think that a lot of men are socialized to believe that their masculinity is in part defined based on how sexually competent they are, how big their penis may be, how long they can last in the bedroom. And their cock now takes on so much social meaning, way beyond I'm feeling horny and aroused and I want to have pleasure. And I think for women, we're socialized to believe that our value is in being attractive, being sexually desirable. And so then what happens during sex is women can get very attached to the sight of a man's erection and ejaculation as signs of a job well done. I really am attractive. And oftentimes this is happening on a subconscious level. Not always, but often, right? Like, I want to know that I'm desired, I'm attractive, I'm doing women well, right? And men are also attached to having a hard cock and going long enough and being, sexually competent, because they want to know that they're doing man well. And so it becomes this dynamic where I think men feel a lot of pressure to get that erection, to have that erection, because A, they want to have pleasure, but also B, they want to feel competent. And then when that doesn't happen, women can oftentimes feel rejected or not good enough or self-doubt and fear. And so that's one of the dynamics that we help men and women and couples unpack with each other, so that they can get the reassurance and the validation that they need to help take pressure off the cock, and to realize that we can expand the definition of sex. So it's not just penis in vagina. It doesn't even actually require a hard cock for people with penises to have pleasure and to be able to give pleasure. And the more that you can diversify ways that you can connect sexually and experience and give pleasure, the easier it is for your cock to show up to the party.
So, this is all incredibly important stuff. And I love this aspect. And I think that guys don't understand that mentality from the female aspect, that the erection and the orgasm is seen as success by the female partner as much as it is the male partner, right? And I think that there's often a disconnect with that idea. And, obviously, when we're talking about sex, it is so intimate. It's so personal. You're so vulnerable, that to not have that positive feedback can be just as impactful on the female psyche as it is on the man. And obviously, a lot of the men, we get stuck in our own bodies if we have an issue with our erections because we're immediately having a sense of our own inadequacy. But it's hard and it's important for us to take a step back and realize that, maybe reassurance the other way is also very important, and communicating, this is not you, I'm very attracted to you, this is not an issue here, is clearly very, very important. I just wanted to make sure that you have an opportunity to comment on that, guys.
Yeah, this is where the emotional intimacy comes in and supports the sexual intimacy. And I think even when men do realize that their partner is feeling rejected or unattractive, that can also be problematic because now I feel pressure to get an erection and ejaculate so you feel good. That can actually make it more challenging, right?
Yeah,
like it's kind of like it's a real bind. Totally. So oftentimes we'll coach folks around what are the things that they can say that can help give that reassurance. So, for example, a lot of men will experience this fear around getting an erection in newer relationships because there's less trust and safety buildup. So, and they're more worried about feeling impressive. And so, one thing I'll tell them to say is sometimes in newer relationships, when I'm really attracted to somebody, I get a little nervous, and it's not because I'm not into you. It's actually because I'm really into you. And with more time and trust and safety, like my cock will come and show up for the party, and I'm committed to you feeling good. I've got 10 fingers, and 10 hands would be amazing, but I got 10 fingers and a mouth, and I'm down to give you pleasure. And I don't know if you're comfortable with it, but my soft cock is still super capable of experiencing a ton of pleasure. And to front load those conversations before you're in the bedroom, so that you're feeling empowered to opt into the conversation, that it's not feeling reactionary, but more like a proactive move. And to do that in a way where you're actually creating the opportunity for more emotional intimacy. Trust and safety is built simply through having that conversation.
I think that's great. And I think that kind of leads into the next question. But for some guys like this, you have a soft cock. That's it can be shameful and very, very embarrassing. And so I love that, coming out and saying it, being vulnerable and saying like, hey, look, this can happen when I'm nervous. But, what strategies do you recommend for guys who are like just really hit with that shame or embarrassment that it happened? And is there any way to kind of overcome these feelings and rebuild that self-confidence?
That's a great question. In the moment where you're feeling acute shame is if you've felt that, it's the most vulnerable, kind of threatening to your sense of masculinity state that you may experience. And so hopefully you're in a situation, in a dynamic where it's safe to get some reassurance and be in that place and let someone in that you're feeling that, and get reassurance that you're okay, that they're not rejecting you or seeing you that way. Shame hides in the dark. So talking about it, explaining and sharing, letting your lover in on what you're feeling is you kind of have to have the courage to lean into that, because you can't hide it, right? That feeling of when you're overcome with shame and it just, all you can do is collapse. And so you kind of have to reach for some support. And then, watching the inner critic in a more long-term kind of strategy is a really important piece to include. What are the thoughts that are running through your system? What are the beliefs that you're sort of spinning and cycling around? If I have a soft cock, or if my cock doesn't get hard, that means this about me as a person, right? Also, I think embodiment in a more broad sense as a strategy for cultivating confidence is really helpful and important. Similar to the intimacy bank, I think on our own time outside of the bedroom, if we are cultivating practices of getting our body kind of strong, spending time connecting to it, whether that's exercise, yoga, mindfulness, body-based mindfulness, where we're noticing the sensations in our body, where we're getting kind of oriented and familiar with what is present, what feelings are moving through our nervous system, and making space for that. And so when it comes out of nowhere and something big and loud happens, we have the kind of capacity to hold it in our system.
I think these
I
are
also,
all... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to add, I also think that this is a place where many women need some empathy building, because it's so empowering to have a part of your body that you don't always have control over. That sometimes it's hard when you don't want it to be hard. It's not hard when you do want it to be hard. It's not coming when you do want it to. It's coming when you don't want it to. And also to understand all the social meaning that gets imbued upon and infused with the cock, right? And I think that there's ways here that it can feel a little foreign to really imagine how much pressure and stress and shame somebody can feel when their cock isn't getting hard. And I think that having, and also just not, that doesn't mean going to over caretaking mode, because if you make a huge deal out of it, that can actually exacerbate the shame. But instead to say like, hey, it's no big deal. It happens to everybody. I'm not upset by this. Like, there's so many other things I'd love to do with you, and redirect attention to other things and have that it's a no big deal attitude. That's some of the most de-shamifying ways that you can relate to this kind of experience.
Yeah, I think really the idea here for men is that, sex doesn't have to be penetrative in these situations. Exactly what you were saying. You can do oral sex. You can participate in fingering, heavy petting, making out. And, a lot of times for a lot of people, you can regain that erection by taking your brain away from your penis and focusing on another thing, focusing on a nipple, a mouth, pussy, whatever it may be. And it can really get you back in the mood. And that's something that I've coached patients in and talked with patients about. I know that that's some of the other sex therapists that we've also had on the show to discuss as well. So they're not focusing on and moving on to something else really is a potential benefit here.
Yeah. And I think underneath that strategy, there's not seeing it as a problem, right? Just seeing it as a thing that a body's doing. And the primary goal is connection and pleasure. And so if the body decides blood's going to leave the penis and the cock, then that's fine. That's not such a huge deal, that we can just redirect and move towards her pleasure.
But it's hard, right?
Yeah.
It's hard for guys. It's very hard for guys to be like, hey, it's just not a problem. It's just, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to go to Kevin's point, because I think that we've been focusing on all positive communication, but there is an aspect of how men, being men, we can freak out in the moment, because like Kevin said, it is hard when it's not hard to react appropriately. And, as a urologist, especially living in Miami, I can't tell you how many women have come up to me, whether they're at a party, whether they're in the office, wherever they are. And they go, I ended a relationship with a partner because he told me that his erectile dysfunction was because of me. And I got that point enough where I decided to do a study on it. So what we did is we surveyed 13,000 women, and we asked them whether they had ever been with a partner who had erectile dysfunction. We asked them whether they were blamed for that, have ever been blamed for erectile dysfunction by a partner. And we also asked them how that impacted their relationship with that partner. And what we found was, after surveying 13,000 women, 80% of women had experienced erectile dysfunction with a partner in the past. More concerning, 1 in 7 women had been blamed by their male partner for erectile dysfunction. Those partners who were blamed had, their sexual experience was associated with less sexual satisfaction. They had more worry and stress in the relationship. They were more likely to end the sexual experience. sooner, and they also were more likely to end the relationship because of the erectile dysfunction. So I think it's very, very important here for guys to understand how you react not only impacts you, it impacts your partner, your relationship inside and outside of the bedroom.
Well said. I'm so glad that you did that research, that you're finding support what we've experienced with clients in our own coaching practice. And I think it is really important there's a vulnerability component here and a shame component. And when somebody feels shame and vulnerable and they don't know how to be with those emotions, they look outward and blame to explain why they're having the experience they're having. Because I'd much rather say it's you, not me. And I think that again, it's so important to understand where that comes from. Like, this isn't happening in a vacuum. This is happening in a society that really puts an enormous and unfair and unreasonable amount of pressure on men and their penises. And I always say patriarchy screws over everybody in different ways, right? And I think this is one of the ways that it actually disfavors and disserves men is that it's not safe to talk about it. It's not okay to just be vulnerable around it. And out of all of the men I've talked to who have ED, so many of them have been shamed by other men, not just by their female partners, right? Because there's this idea that, there's this policing that happens around masculinity.
Kevin, I don't know about you, but every dude has ED. If you're making fun of a guy for having ED, honestly, like, get over it. You probably have ED yourself, like, at some point.
It's happened at some point.
Right? So, like, no one should be shaming, no dude should be shaming anyone for ED. If you're like a 50-year-old man and you're like, I've never had ED,
but that's part of like the whole bravado that comes with like this idea of erections and masculinity, right? These guys are just saying like, hey, look, like, oh man, you're just not as man as me. Like, I've never had to deal with it. And it's almost like kind of we're a generation that's kind of grown up with like very accessible porn. And when you see porn, you see these guys with erections that are lasting forever, and it just never an issue. Again, it goes with the whole idea of like this bravado, this masculinity that just is kind of like ingrained as a stereotype.
Yeah, I think that's so essential to a lot of men. A lot of our identities is that sense of I'm a good man, right? I know the directions. I know the IKEA furniture without reading it. And like that, when that gets poked at, like, that's the most threatening way to poke at your sense of self-confident masculinity is my dick doesn't get hard with a woman. Like, that can easily kind of cut down your entire sense of self in a way. And so, I mean, I guess I have a little bit of empathy for that reaction of like wanting to do anything to save yourself in that moment. But I think the alternative, if you're not able to be vulnerable and, the instinct is to blame the other person, like, take yourself out of the environment. It's better to say nothing than to say some bullshit that is harming your lover or person you're with, Just go to the bathroom, give yourself a moment, talk yourself down. You're okay.
Yeah, I mean, so just this idea though is also important for the partners, right? So we do have a lot of female partners that listen to this podcast. And one thing from that study that I did do is I got a lot of pushback from men, because I posted on Reddit. I wanted to see how people responded. And I got a lot of pushback from men saying like, hey, listen, this is an important study, but what about the guys who are, made fun of by their female partner in the moment? Is that a thing? So, and I think that a lot of guys have that experience too. So my question then becomes for partners listening to this who are dealing with, their male partner who is struggling with ED, how do they navigate issues with erections in the bedroom for their partner?
I think part of it is asking for reassurance if you need it. And that can happen in the moment. It can also happen more broadly in the relationship. So notice if your own inner critic or fear of your attractiveness is coming up, and just name that, get some reassurance. but also feeling really comfortable with a wide range of ways of experiencing pleasure. One thing that, and I think, listen, disappointment is inevitable. There's nothing that we can do to avoid being disappointed, being disappointing to somebody else. We do so much mental and emotional gymnastics to try to avoid disappointment. But I think culturally, we just need to get better with this emotion. And so, yeah, you might feel disappointed because you want a particular kind of sex, or you want it to look a particular kind of way. And disappointment and rejection are not the same thing. Can you stay connected in the face of disappointment? Can you stay open and curious to whatever else is available? And experiment. And maybe it's more of a redirection towards emotional intimacy and less around this hot, amazing flow state sexual intimacy. That's still a deposit in the intimacy bank. That's still a benefit and a positive. And, I think part of what helps women and men in these situations is to feel more confident as a lover and more comfortable with hands, mouths, toys, playing with soft cocks. My mind was blown when I learned in my life that men with soft cocks like pleasure and how to pleasure a soft cock. And in fact, we do this game called the soft game. So whenever Seb has a hard time getting an erection, we'll put his soft... we'll put his... Sorry to out you, my love. We'll put his soft cock in my mouth, and we'll time how long he can go without getting hard. And sometimes I think we'll have different versions. Sometimes I'll try to get him hard. Sometimes I won't. We'll just let it just hang out in my mouth. And it's just so fun to flip it on its head and to make it to gamify it and to make it silly and playful and lighthearted and to see if we can kind of compete with past times that has happened. It just brings a totally different attitude towards the experience. And for us, it's often really effective.
We are competitive. So if I can win, then I'm pretty stoked. If I can make it, 2 minutes staying soft, I'm trying really hard now. I don't usually win.
The hardest way to get an erection is to try really hard. And the hardest way to have an orgasm is to try really hard. But if you can have some reverse psychology in the mix, it throws the pressure, on its head.
Absolutely correct. The more you're thinking about it, the harder it is. Now, I love that. You kind of presented this kind of, maybe it's like an exercise or practice that you guys did for that situation. So that leads to my next question. What are some other exercises or practice that you recommend to couples who are looking to rebuild intimacy and physical closeness in any relationship, whether it is from ED or other issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think with ED specifically, practicing mindful masturbation is a really great practice for the guy to explore and experiment. And that doesn't have to be done alone, right? That can be with the support of your partner. You can be masturbating together next to each other. You can be looking at erotica or reading erotica. We are big fans of other forms of erotic exploration, and sharing that kind of experience with a partner can be really helpful.
Though I might add, when we think about traditional mindful masturbation, what the goal is to allow the sensations you're experiencing in your body feed your pleasure, desire, and turn on. I often say that there's different sources of erotic material. There's the sensations we're experiencing. There's maybe fantasies or memories or porn and erotica. Fantasies, memories, porn and erotica, those are more cognitive and external sources of turn on and desire. And I think learning how to use the sensations in your body to drive your own sense of pleasure is so essential for folks who have ED, because then you're able to redirect your attention from the fear, from the anxiety, from that self-fulfilling prophecy and the spin out to what feels good in this moment. What does my body feel like? Can I immerse in sensations? And this is really foreign for some people. And if that's the case, then we recommend titrating. So watch your porn or erotica or think about your fantasies, get your erection, and then pause it and notice how things feel good and pay attention to the sensations. And if you start to lose your turn on, go back to that stimuli that you're used to and build this muscle over time to allow the sensations you're feeling in your body to feed your desire. Sex can be a meditation. So meditating without sex is really valuable, but also thinking about how we can start to think of sex as this meditation where I can stay present and not get trapped by the alluring thoughts of the mind, sometimes really mean and painful thoughts that are still alluring and captivating, and instead stay present with what's happening in the body in this present moment.
I think that is something that a lot of us lose as we get older, right? And I think that's something that, I don't know, if you asked me when I just hit puberty, I could think about like a lamp and jerk off. Right? Like, I'm like, oh, that lamp looks like titties. I'm good. Like, I'll look at a Pottery Barn magazine and I'm going off. But now, it's just not that, right? Stressors, life, it's hard to even meditate, let alone just like focus and free your mind of everything else. So this is something that sounds very empowering and sounds something that we can do. So it's basically this idea of not using stimulation, just using your thoughts, your imagination, or your personal fantasies to arouse yourself. Is that pretty much it?
Actually, it's using sensory-based experiences to arouse yourself. And it's trying to get out of your head and being more in your body and really noticing. And also, when we think about sex, so much of the time isn't actually genitally focused. At least I think, when we think about good sex, right? There's more foreplay and kissing and lead up and anticipation and ramp up. For most people, actually, of all genders, when they masturbate, they spend 90 to 100% of the time with their genitals specifically. So with mindful masturbation, we're also wanting to bring in our whole body and notice how it feels good when we touch our chest and when we rub our muscles and when we grab our inner thighs and what does it feel like when we grab our cock, and can I notice how it feels, what my hand is noticing versus what my cock is noticing, and studying sensation and really getting curious about it and tracking how it evolves and changes. And it's really about noticing a sensory-based experience as much as you can. And when your attention drifts, just like with meditation, bringing it back to sensation.
I'll just throw in a couple other practical strategies that using a cock ring, I think there's maybe stigma or maybe not around using cock rings or toys, and exploring playing with all different kinds of sex toys is very helpful to support both erections and just pleasure more broadly. We often suggest for folks where this is a common issue, or where a lot of this kind of non-penetrative sex is not as familiar for couples, we'll suggest taking penetrative sex off the table for an amount of time. Maybe it's a month, where any sex you have doesn't include penetration, and you just go in knowing and expecting that, and then it forces you to get creative and create new pathways of play and connection and exploration. And then you could also look up sensate focus. It's a great practice from Cornell University, I believe, that is more about cultivating sensual intimacy and closeness and touch that just creates a new way of experiencing sort of that mindful connection, but it's not with yourself, it's with another person.
And I think, we're talking a lot about psychological and physiological things that you can do, but I do think it's important to also name that there could be something going on that's worth checking out. So talk to your physician, explore if there is a medication you're taking like SSRIs, if there are other kinds of things that are going on with your physical health that could be impacting your capacity to get an erection. Usually, if you have an easier time getting an erection when you're masturbating and it shows up more when you're with a partner, that's pointing to some of these intimacy-based challenges. But if you're finding that you're also having a hard time getting an erection on your own, definitely talk to your physician. And sometimes things like Viagra and Cialis can be really helpful for getting out of that negative feedback loop. and jump starting the system and feeling more confidence. Although I will also say for folks who have a lot of intense anxiety, Viagra and Cialis might not work for them. And so, I think that's also a factor to be considering is, are these medications helpful, and what is your medical doctor suggesting that you try out as well?
Spot on. Justin shaking his, nodding his head in agreement. It's that what you just said is a lot of what I say to my patients. Like the way to approach erectile dysfunction, biopsychosocial model, right? There's the biological aspect of it, the psycho aspect of it, and also the social aspect of it. But that one analogy or metaphor, I don't know if you use this, Justin, about, hey, do you have erection issues when you're with your partner? And are you able to masturbate by yourself? Like I always use that. And that is one of the, it's like a clear diagnostic in itself right there.
Yeah, I use the same. I use it often. And just to piggyback off of everything you guys are saying, right? You should, if you have erectile dysfunction, you should not ignore it. You should go see a urologist no matter what. Now, obviously, we're talking about ways to work around it. And a lot of this is on the assumption either you potentially have a medical issue that you're really struggling with erectile dysfunction and you're not interested in some of the options, or, you're just embarrassed and you're trying to work it out because of a psychosocial part more than a bio part. But, your erection is a window into your health. Sexual health is health. And having erectile dysfunction can be a warning sign of health issues coming down the pipeline, or a direct cause due to other health issues that you may be struggling with that you may not be aware of. Either way, you should talk to a doctor about it. And I promise you, Kevin knows this. If you have a soft penis and you want to have a hard penis and you want to have an erection, one way or another, we have a way to get you an erection, whether it's medications, injections, penile implants, combination of them, whether it's, a cock ring. There are so many ways. We have a buffet of tools and options to make sure that you're achieving a satisfactory sex life. Now, the other thing here is that penetrative sex may not be the sex that you desire. I have a lot of older couples that just mutual masturbation or heavy petting and just get off to that. So, it's important that you communicate with yourself, your partner, what you guys want to get out of sex. And if you're not getting it and you want to achieve an erection, whatever means that may be to achieve, we're here for you. But we can't help you unless you talk to us. And that's the big thing here.
And can I just add, I think it's important that you seek help early, before you build up some of these negative feedback loops, before some of these meanings that you're making out of these experiences become more deeply entrenched in your psyche. We find that when folks come to us, when these challenges first start, it's much easier and much quicker to support them to start having more empowering and pleasure fulfilling experiences than when it's something that's been going on for years and finally they muster up the courage to seek some help.
I think that's a great way to end it. Do you guys have any final comments, concerns, tips, or recommendations for our listeners?
Give yourself some self-compassion. Bodies do what bodies do. And we just need to normalize it. And this is where the myth of normality really comes in. If we only talk about what we think is normal, it perpetuates this idea that that's in fact what's normal. And the more that we can normalize these experiences and talk about what's challenging about it, the more it de-shamifies it and makes it feel more accessible to get support from our partners, from our doctors, from intimacy coaches. You can feel free to reach out to me and Seb through our website, turnon.love. We're happy to offer complimentary consultations. We also have a wide range of workshops, both on demand and live, whether it's in person or virtual, and courses. If you're a couple in a long-term relationship that's struggling with feeling turn on and the spark, whether it's because of ED or just other challenges, we have a course for couples called Sustainable Intimacy, Reignite the Flame for the Long Game. That's really impactful. And then also, I have a special discount code for your listeners. Man Up will give your listeners $75 off an upcoming course I'm teaching in January called Sexual and Emotional Intimacy Skills. It's a class I teach at Stanford. I'm also really delighted to offer it outside of academia. It's an online course, so no matter where you are, you can access it. And if you're happening to listen to this podcast and it's not January through March when I offer it, you can always rent it on demand.
Great. Seb, you got any comments?
I just want to thank you guys for creating this kind of platform and space to have these vulnerable, edgy conversations and really kind of redefine our definitions of masculinity and what it means to be a healthy, integrated man in our society. You guys are really clearly templating how to do it well.
Yeah, I second that.
Appreciate that.
Well, this was a great conversation, guys. Thank you so much for coming on. Really, really enjoyed it. And I think our listeners really learned a lot.
For sure.
It was so much fun.
I definitely learned
thanks for having us.
Yeah.
And you learned about my ability to get aroused by lamps. So
I hope I go to bed thinking about that, Justin.
I want to see the lamp. There are.
I
want to see it.
I know that lamp well.
Hotlamps.com.
It was just the top of the lamp looked like titty nipples, like just
wow.
like nipples. Yeah, just
I know what you mean.
But thanks to all of our listeners for listening. As always, subscribe, download. You can find us at the Man Up Pod on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and all of our YouTube as well. You can see our beautiful faces on that. And do you guys have any socials that we can follow you on?
Turnon.love.
Turnon.love. So find us there, find them there. And for Kevin, Dr. Ali, Seb, and I, thanks for listening. Until next time, have a good one.